I first realized something was wrong the night she stopped mid-sentence and stared at the floor, as if the truth had slipped out before she could catch it. We were sitting across from each other in a quiet apartment that smelled faintly of rain and old books, the kind of place where conversations tend to get honest whether you want them to or not. She twisted the ring on her finger, one I'd never seen her remove, and said, almost casually, "He tried, you know. It just didn't work." At the time, I didn't know how much weight that sentence carried. I thought she was talking about an argument, another misunderstanding in a relationship already strained by distance and routine. But the way her voice softened, the way her shoulders curved inward, told me it was something deeper. Something personal. Something that had been breaking quietly for a long time. She and I weren't supposed to matter to each other this much. We met through overlapping lives, shared friends, shared spaces, shared silences after everyone else had left. I was the one who listened. The one who remembered details. She was the one who laughed easily but went quiet when the room emptied. Between us, there was no plan, no intention. Just a gradual closeness that felt harmless until it wasn't. Her boyfriend existed in the background of every story she told. He was never cruel, never dramatic, just distant in ways that are harder to forgive. He says he's exhausted, she told me. He says things will be different next time. There was no anger in her voice when she said it, only a tired kind of hope that had learned not to expect much. I didn't ask why she was telling me all this. Some part of me already knew. When someone starts sharing the quiet disappointments they hide from the person they love, it's rarely accidental. That night, she finally looked up at me. "I don't know what to do anymore," she said. Not as a question. As a confession. I should have drawn a line then. I should have reminded her of loyalty, of patience, of all the sensible things people say when they want to stay uninvolved. Instead, I felt the dangerous pull of being needed, of being the one who saw her clearly when someone else couldn't. The central conflict didn't arrive with a single choice or dramatic moment. It arrived softly, disguised as concern and understanding. And as I sat there listening, I understood something unsettling. Whatever she decided next, I was already part of the story. In the days that followed, her presence lingered in ways I couldn't ignore. Every conversation replayed itself in my head, each pause and half-finished sentence carrying more meaning than the words themselves. I told myself I was overthinking, that people confide in friends all the time. But this felt different. It felt like standing too close to a fault line, aware the ground might shift without warning. She reached out first. A simple message, late in the evening. "Are you awake?" I was. Of course I was. We met again under the pretense of normalcy, coffee, small talk, the familiar rituals that kept everything looking harmless. But beneath it all ran a current neither of us named. She spoke about her boyfriend more openly now, no longer smoothing the edges of her disappointment. "He says he understands," she told me, stirring her drink until the spoon clinked against the cup. "But then nothing really changes. It's like he hears me, but he doesn't listen." I watched her hands as she spoke, noticing how they trembled just slightly. This wasn't about a single failure or a single night. It was about feeling invisible in a relationship that was supposed to feel safe. I recognized that loneliness, the kind that grows even when someone is right beside you. "What do you want?" I asked, careful to keep my voice steady. She hesitated. "I want to stop feeling like I'm asking for too much." That answer stayed with me. Wanting to be seen shouldn't feel like a burden. Yet here she was, negotiating her own needs as if they were unreasonable demands. Our conversations stretched longer, slipping into emotional territory usually reserved for someone else. She told me about the early days with him, how attentive he'd been, how she'd believed that effort would always be mutual. I told her less about myself, but enough that she began to look at me differently, like I was proof that attentiveness still existed. I noticed the shift when she started asking what I thought she should do. Not what was right. Not what was expected. What she should do. That responsibility weighed heavily. Every word I chose felt consequential, capable of pushing her closer to a decision she wasn't ready to make. I tried to stay neutral, but neutrality is fragile when emotions are involved. One evening, she sighed and said, "He wants to try again. He says this time will be different." There it was, the crossroads we'd been circling. I nodded, offering the support I knew I should give. But inside, a quieter truth surfaced, uncomfortable and undeniable. Whatever happened next, the distance between her and him had already been filled with conversations, with understanding, with me. And as we sat there in shared silence, I realized the conflict was no longer just hers. It had quietly become mine too. The tension didn't announce itself. It settled in quietly, like a second heartbeat I couldn't ignore. Every time she mentioned him trying again, I felt the pull of two opposing truths. I wanted her to find peace, and I didn't want to disappear from the space I'd come to occupy in her life. She began to measure her words more carefully, as if she were afraid of revealing too much. When we met, she smiled first, now an automatic defense. But the smile never reached her eyes. "He's been attentive," she said one afternoon, tracing the rim of her glass. "Asking questions. Making plans. And how does that feel?" I asked. She paused. "Confusing." That answer told me everything. Effort, when it comes too late, can feel like an echo rather than a voice. I wondered if he sensed the urgency behind his own change, if he knew it was fueled by the possibility of losing her rather than truly understanding her. Our conversations grew more restrained, but the restraint itself created pressure. The things we didn't say crowded the room. I noticed how she leaned closer when she spoke, how her gaze lingered a second too long before pulling away. Each small moment felt loaded, dangerous. One night, she admitted something that shifted the ground beneath us. "I compare him to you," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I hate that I do." I felt a sharp mix of guilt and clarity. This was no longer just emotional support drifting into something ambiguous. I was a standard, one I'd never asked to be, but one I couldn't pretend didn't exist. "That's not fair to either of you," I said quietly. "I know," she replied. "But it's honest." Honesty, I was learning, can be as destructive as it is freeing. She told me he had succeeded this time, that he showed up in the ways she'd been asking for. There was relief in her voice when she said it, but also distance, like she was describing someone else's life. "I thought it would fix everything," she admitted. "But now I'm not sure what I'm supposed to feel." I listened, fighting the urge to interpret, to guide, to influence. The more present I became, the more I risked tipping the balance. And yet, stepping back felt like abandoning her in the middle of something unresolved. That night, as we parted, she touched my arm briefly, an instinctive gesture, immediately withdrawn. "I don't want to lose you," she said. I nodded, though I didn't promise anything. I couldn't. The truth was becoming unavoidable. Her relationship was changing, and so was ours. And whatever decision she made next would define not only who she stayed with, but who I would become in the aftermath. The tension didn't break. It tightened, drawing us both toward a moment neither of us was ready to face. The revelation arrived without ceremony, which somehow made it heavier. There was no dramatic confrontation, no raised voices, just a quiet moment where truth slipped through before either of us could stop it. She asked me to meet her one last time just to talk. The phrasing alone told me this wasn't casual. We sat across from each other again, the same space, the same muted light, but everything felt altered, like returning to a room after something important has already happened there. "I told him," she said after a long pause. My chest tightened. "Told him what?" "How close I was to leaving," she answered. "How alone I felt. How I started questioning myself." She watched my face carefully, as if gauging how much more I could take. "Not about you. But about the truth." I nodded slowly, absorbing it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and yet, I could. It was like stepping into a memory I didn't know I still carried, the moment when honesty finally surfaces, too late to be gentle. "And he listened?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "Really listened." Her voice wavered for the first time. He didn't defend himself. He didn't minimize it. He just stayed. That word landed hard. Stayed. The thing she'd been asking for all along. "He's different now," she continued. "Present. Intentional. He's doing everything I asked for months ago." She let out a breath that sounded more like grief than relief. "And I don't know if that makes it better or worse." The silence between us said everything we were too afraid to speak aloud. I realized then that I wasn't competing with him, not anymore. I had already served my purpose, uncomfortable as it was to admit. "What are you going to do?" I asked. She looked down at her hands. "I'm choosing to try. Not because it's easy. Not because everything feels fixed. But because I need to know whether this effort can grow into something real or if it's already too late." There it was. The choice. Clear. Painful. Necessary. I wanted to argue, to tell her she deserved consistency without ultimatums, change without fear. But those words would have been about me, not her. So I stayed quiet. "I don't want to lose you," she said softly, echoing her earlier confession. "I know," I replied. And for the first time, that knowledge felt final. As we stood to leave, I understood the truth I'd been avoiding. I wasn't the answer to her problem. I was the evidence of it. Proof of what she needed, and a catalyst for him to finally show up. When she walked away, it felt like watching a door close gently instead of slamming shut, still painful, but honest. And I knew, as I stood there alone, that the real consequences of this story were only just beginning. Time passed in the quiet way it always does after something meaningful ends, not abruptly, but with a slow rearranging of habits. I stopped expecting her messages. I learned which hours of the day felt emptier without her voice filling them. Life resumed its rhythm, but it carried a new awareness, like a scar you don't notice until you brush against it. When she finally reached out again, it wasn't dramatic. No apology. No confession. Just a simple acknowledgement of shared history. We met once more, carefully, as if handling something fragile we both respected too much to break. She looked steadier. Not happier exactly, but grounded. There was a difference. "He's still trying," she said, as if updating me on the weather. "Not perfectly, but consistently." I nodded. Consistency, the quiet miracle everyone underestimates. "And you?" she asked. "I'm learning," I said honestly. Learning how easily good intentions can blur into emotional trespassing. Learning that being needed doesn't always mean being chosen. We didn't linger. There was nothing left to resolve between us, only understanding. What we'd shared had already done its work. It had exposed the fractures in her relationship, and the vulnerabilities in me. As we said goodbye, there was no tension in the air this time. Just gratitude. And a touch of sadness for what might have been, balanced by relief for what no longer needed to be. Later, alone, I reflected on the truth I'd avoided from the beginning. Infidelity isn't always about desire or recklessness. Sometimes it's about proximity to empathy. About finding yourself reflected more clearly in someone else's attention than in the person who's supposed to know you best. Her boyfriend had failed the first time not because he was incapable, but because he hadn't understood what was at stake. When he finally did, it was almost too late. Almost. What saved them wasn't his success in the end, but her willingness to demand more and his willingness to listen. What changed me was realizing that stepping into someone's emotional absence carries responsibility, even when it feels harmless. I don't regret knowing her. I regret how easy it is to cross invisible lines when loneliness is shared. Some stories end with love chosen or love lost. This one ended with clarity. And sometimes, that's the most honest resolution of all, walking away not as the winner or the victim, but as someone who understands themselves a little better than before. I thought clarity would feel like relief. Instead, it arrived as a quiet reckoning, an awareness that some connections change you without staying. Weeks after our last meeting, I still caught myself noticing things she would have commented on, a line in a book, a pause in a song, the way certain evenings invited confession. Absence, I learned, can be surprisingly vocal. We didn't speak often after that. When we did, it was careful and kind, stripped of the urgency that once defined us. She never complained about him anymore. That alone told me something had shifted. Not perfection, just intention. The kind that shows up repeatedly, even when it's uncomfortable. One afternoon, she said, "I don't think I realized how close I was to losing myself." I nodded. Sometimes it takes standing near the edge to see it. She smiled then, softer than before. "You helped me see what I needed to ask for." I didn't reply right away. Gratitude is complicated when it carries consequences. What she didn't say, and didn't need to, was that our chapter had ended. Not because it lacked meaning, but because it had served it. We were never meant to be the destination. We were the detour that clarified the route. I spent time unpacking my own role in all of it. The ease with which empathy turned into attachment. The way I mistook being understood for being chosen. I didn't absolve myself, but I didn't condemn myself either. Growth rarely comes from extremes. There are nights now when I think back to the moment she told me he had succeeded the second time. Not with bitterness, but with context. Success, I realized, isn't a single act, it's sustained presence. It's listening before the threat of loss forces your hand. Our story didn't end with betrayal exposed or love declared. It ended with something quieter and harder to dramatize: accountability. Hers. His. Mine. And maybe that's the truth people avoid. Sometimes the most impactful relationships aren't the ones you keep, but the ones that teach you where the lines are and why they matter. I don't know what the future holds for her. I don't know if his effort will last. But I know this: the next time someone confides in me from the edges of their relationship, I'll listen differently. More carefully. With clearer boundaries. Because some stories don't warn you when they begin. They only ask, much later, whether you were paying attention while they unfolded.